Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I am talking with Avi Loeb. Avi is a professor of science at Harvard University and the author of this book, Extraterrestrial, which is going into paperback soon, probably in the next week or so from the time this episode debuts. We're going to talk about the search for extraterrestrial life. And we're going to talk about the scientific method and the importance of scientists embracing anomalies and not being scared of them, not being scared of the stigma that comes with researching areas that are not necessarily accepted by the mainstream scientific and academic communities. This was a really fun conversation for me, and it's all rooted in this book that he wrote here, which is about an extraterrestrial object which passed by Earth not too long ago. The object is called Oumuamua. It's a long cylindrical type of object that was about the size, I guess, of a football field, give or take. And the way it moved past Earth and then past the sun and kind of all the properties of this thing makes Avi think that it might have been an extraterrestrial probe of sorts. Or maybe it's just a hypothesis that he wants people to seriously consider. And he writes about it in his book and why he wants people to seriously consider it. And that's a major part of this conversation, but also a major part of the conversation is about his Galileo Project, which is a project where basically he wants to raise $100 million to study UFOs and other objects that pass by Earth. He wants to create an infrastructure so that we can do this. And it makes a lot of sense. If the Pentagon says they're out there, shouldn't we invest money into studying what's out there? And so putting stigma aside, putting the fact that it's not a mainstream topic aside, putting your emotional intelligence into check and saying, hey, this is something worth learning. Will you join me in my conversation with Avi? Open up your mind a little bit and just listen. Thanks, and I'll see you on the other side. Little UFOs. If they can acknowledge that they exist, then we can study them.
Hello, Eric.
Hello, Avi. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure.
I read your book, loved it. I looked at many of the links you sent. I didn't get a chance to read everything you've published, obviously.
That's the foundation for my next book, actually.
Oh, good.
Which I'm working on now.
But I do have some topics I'd like to go over.
Okay.
I've always had you on my short list of potential guests, and the reason I reached out to you this time was because I came across another conversation you were having where you talked about being at a conference and one of your fellow scientists wishing that Oumuamua didn't exist and how we should all be craving anomalies. And I really, really felt that. I do feel like there's almost like a housekeeping approach to certain careers where it's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to crave anomalies. You're supposed to want mystery.
This is nothing new for me because as a kid, I already witnessed the same experience sitting at the dinner table, and the adults in the room would dismiss a difficult question that I would ask simply because they didn't know the answer. And in fact, that was one of the motivations for me to become a scientist, because as a scientist, you are not supposed to pretend that you know the answer in advance. You're supposed to follow the evidence. And in fact, you can find the answer yourself. And this is pretty much maintaining our childhood curiosity without prejudice. And that's the biggest lesson we've learned from Galileo Galilei being put in house arrest by the adults in the room back then, which was the church or the philosophers, who knew the answer. They knew that the earth is at the center of the universe, or at least they wanted to believe that. And they were much stronger, politically speaking. But that, of course, didn't change the fact that the Earth moved around the sun, irrespective of what they found to be popular at the time. And today, they would have canceled him on social media, which would have been even worse than putting him in house arrest. If you were to ask those philosophers to design a rocket that would reach Mars, they would get it wrong. There is a clear test of their worldview as to whether it's real or not. You just ask them to design the parameters of the rocket, and they would, assuming that the Earth is at the center and Mars moves around the Earth, they would just never reach the target. And so that's my point, that as scientists, we can be modest. We don't need to pretend anything. But then, as I became a scientist, I realized that a lot of the same psychology is practiced by other adults in the room. These are my colleagues in academia that are trying to pretend they know much more than they actually know by behaving as experts. Now, what does an expert mean? It means that you have a body of knowledge based on your experience, and when you see something new, you're trying to explain it based on this knowledge. And of course, you would be upset if something comes along, an anomaly that cannot be explained by the knowledge you have, because that would illustrate a weakness in your ability to forecast anything that we see. And a lot of experts are really bothered by anomalies, and they try to brush them aside. In the case of the object that we are talking about, all the experts that studied rocks throughout their careers for decades argued that it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. And even though it was the first object that we spotted near Earth from outside the solar system, and you would expect it to be a typical rock, they argued, no, it's a rock, but of a type that is made of pure hydrogen, pure nitrogen, or maybe even a collection of dust particles loosely bound. We've never seen anything like it. We don't know whether there are nurseries making such things, but nevertheless, they behaved like the adults in the room, and they ridiculed any other interpretation, such as that maybe indeed it's something that we've never seen before, meaning was produced artificially by an extraterrestrial technological civilization. And to me, this experience resembles a caveman finding a cell phone and arguing that it's a rock of a type that caveman never seen before. And of course, that's legitimate as long as the caveman is not curious, does not explore it further, because if he were to press a button and record his voice and press another button and record his image, it will become clear through this learning experience, which is the scientific method, basically, by collecting more data, more evidence. Eventually, you realize this cell phone is not a rock. And of course, that has important implications. Finding an object in space that is not a rock would have a dramatic impact on the future of humanity. And I say to myself, how can we ignore that possibility? How is it possible that on Twitter it's being ridiculed, that anyone considering it is stigmatized or ignored? And the point is, it's just like Pascal's wager, where, the discussion about God cannot be ignored because the implications are huge. And here is another context where Pascal's wager applies. And unfortunately, academia, which is supposed to be very open-minded, is not really following on these anomalies, trying to figure out what they mean.
Yeah, and I feel like too, one of my bullet points is exactly about the stigma in certain areas. What do they call them now? UAPs? For the longest time, UFOs were stigmatized. Of course, we know now that there was a strong interest in them. They just weren't telling us. But it seems like anything that could be discovered that would change the paradigm of humanity is what is most stigmatized.
Yeah, but I have two issues with that. One, this is a subject of great importance for our future, because it's just like my daughters when they were young, they thought that they are the center of the world, they're the smartest. And then that view changed when they went to the kindergarten and they matured. And we as a civilization will only mature by meeting others. And it might open our eyes to not only the fact that there is a smarter kid on the block, but also to some truths about our circumstances. You know, it might be like a love letter that we receive in our mailbox that tells us how to behave better. Okay. And that's extremely important. So it's not just another paradigm shift. It's actually the most fundamental change in our perspective about our place in the universe, in our understanding of what we are doing here. Okay. And that's point number one. And the second point is that, there is this claim that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. My point is, extraordinary evidence, first of all, requires an open mind. If you're not open to discover wonderful things, you will never find them. But more importantly, it requires extraordinary funding, because we had to invest $1.1 billion by the National Science Foundation in order to discover gravitational waves. Okay, we invested $10 billion in the Large Hadron Collider, smashing particles against each other in an attempt to figure out the nature of the dark matter. Most of the matter in the universe is of unknown nature. We don't know what particles are making it. And we were trying to produce them in the laboratory in the form of supersymmetric particles, which were the most popular flavor of those dark matter particles. And we didn't find anything, $10 billion. And then, we invested hundreds of millions of dollars in searching for other types of particles. And we haven't found them for 40 years. The dark matter is not known. And my point is, this is part of the mainstream of science. There are lots of ideas that are being tested at the investment of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And that's routine in the mainstream of science. Why is the search for equipment from other civilizations stigmatized? I mean, we are sending a spacecraft to space, and that will exit the solar system. We've sent 5 of them so far. And why not? We know that most of the stars formed billions of years before the sun. So there could have been something that predated us, even more advanced than we are, because half of the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So why this arrogance? Why thinking that, starting point, that it would be extraordinary to imagine something even more advanced than we are? In fact, it should be the other way around. We should start from scratch, basically saying everything we see around us is typical. Let's not assume it's unusual. And then we would never assume that we are at the center of the universe, which was a wrong approach. We would never assume that the Earth-Sun system is special, which was wrong. And the same is true about intelligence. Why do we think that Albert Einstein was the most the smartest scientist that existed since the Big Bang? It's very likely there was another scientist 1 billion years ago that discovered even more important things about quantum mechanics or gravity. And, and we just didn't hear about that one. There is this paradox that Enrico Fermi, the physicist, posed 70 years ago while having lunch at Los Alamos. He was sitting with his friends and saying, well, if extraterrestrial life is so likely, where is everybody? And, it's just like a fisherman sitting on the beach and looking at the ocean and saying, where are all the fish? I don't see anything. Well, of course, if you're not using a fishing net, you will never catch anything. And even if you're using a fishing net, there is this story about a fisherman that went to sea and came back and said, I discovered the law of nature. All fish are bigger than 2 inches. And someone asked him, what's the size of the holes in your fishing net? And he said, 2 inches. So obviously, if the holes are too big, you will never catch anything. And during the time of Enrico Fermi, he didn't even use a net. Now we have equipment. We can build telescope systems that can search for objects like that. And it's very presumptuous, very arrogant to say, sit at home and say, nobody is knocking on my door, therefore I don't have neighbors. Well, you better look through your windows to find your neighbors, and better with telescopes.
Yeah, well, the Fermi paradox always annoyed me as an excuse to assume that we were alone. And it seemed like a lot of the people in my circle that cited it weren't the ones looking up.
I'm really worried about a committee sitting somewhere in the Milky Way and looking at the solar system and saying, well, we are not yet sure that there is an intelligent species there, because, for one thing, we sent out the New Horizons mission out of the solar, away from the solar system, and it has a box on board that carries 30 grams of the ashes of Clyde Tombaugh, the scientist who discovered Pluto, because this mission was supposed to learn more about Pluto. And that's very embarrassing, because what are ashes? They're burned up DNA. So you take the genetic information of a scientist you want to commemorate, and then you destroy all that genetic information, burn it up, and put it in a box to commemorate the memory, that person. And if another civilization finds this box, they would say, oh, this is not an intelligent civilization. They have this primitive ritual of destroying the information about a person they want to commemorate. And actually, it was sent by NASA, which is our scientific representative. So I'm much more in favor now of sending a spacecraft that would move much faster than New Horizon and catch up with it and go in front of it, so that if anyone finds a spacecraft that came from Earth, the other one would be the first, and we would apologize for sending that box coming after.
Well, I would like to think that if they're out there and they've been here a lot longer than us, that they would understand that there's a progression of understanding. Like, they probably sent this. There's probably another one coming,
Well, it's probably not politically correct on their behalf if they're much more advanced than we are, to laugh at us, because, we don't laugh at the ants when we see them on the pavement. We just, sometimes we are curious, look at them. Most of the time we ignore them. And so they probably most likely ignore us.
Yeah. Well, prior to me logging on, I was listening to another podcast that you were on, which I don't remember the name of it because I'm not actually subscribed. I was just looking for shows that you were on, so I'll have to dig it up and cite it in the description. But the hosts were talking about the Kardashev scale, and
Yes.
there was this idea presented in the conversation about how, with as old as the universe is, there had to be civilizations before us. I mean, it doesn't make sense that there wouldn't be. And that if you are able to sustain evolution for this long, it stands to reason that a civilization could advance enough that whatever they're doing in the universe would be indiscernible from nature, which I found really fascinating.
Well, that's it if they want to hide themselves. But,
Yeah.
Another approach they may take is put the goggles on their head and just live in the metaverse. That's a very depressing notion that I thought about after, Facebook announced that they changed their name to Meta, if it becomes popular, because, that is an opportunity for a highly advanced civilization to basically detach itself from the rest of the universe, not engage with all of us out there. And you might think, okay, well, if they close themselves in a cocoon, we might not know about them. That's not necessarily true, because according to the second law of thermodynamics, they need to get rid of their trash. And, we can, just like those investigative journalists, we can find that look through the trash cans of celebrities in Hollywood, we can learn about them. I do believe that a sufficiently advanced civilization might not decide to hide itself. It actually would like to promote its goals throughout the interstellar space, and we would see evidence for that. And it will not be biological creatures that come to visit us. It will be advanced artificial intelligence systems that outperform our human astronauts. And then we'll have to figure out what their intention is when we find them in our mailbox, so to speak, near Earth. This would be very interesting. We are thinking about vehicles that are propelled by the standard, rocket fuel that we are using. But just think about the fact that as physicists, we don't know what most of the universe is made of. And the two dominant constituents of the universe are dark matter. We don't know what it's made of, which induces attractive gravity, just like the matter that we are made of. Okay, so the dark matter could be just matter of a different type. We are not made of it. It doesn't interact with light, but it's matter. Okay, so it produces attractive gravity, just like our ordinary matter. And then there is another constituent which actually dominates right now the mass per unit volume of the universe, and that is dark energy. That's the energy of the vacuum action. And that induces negative gravity. It actually causes the universe not just to expand, but accelerates its expansion. So the expansion, it basically repels everything in the universe, so that you get the galaxies receding away from each other at a speed that increases over time, and eventually they will recede away from each other faster than light. So we will not have any galaxy within the region that we can look at eventually. Once the universe ages by another factor of 10 or so, and so there are these two constituents whose nature we don't understand. One that induces attractive gravity that we are familiar with, and the other one that induces repulsive gravity. And you can imagine that if they understand what these ingredients are, they harness them, they use them. Okay, and you can use them for propulsion, for example. And if they know how to use them, we would never see the exhaust plumes that we are used to around the vehicles. So just to give you an example, okay, for something that will not be understandable for us. In general, I was sitting at a forum in the Washington National Cathedral on the 10th of November in a panel that included Jeff Bezos, Bill Nelson, the head of NASA, and Avril Haines, director of national intelligence. I was also speaking with two reverends there, mentioning the possibility that these were David Wilkinson. He's a theologian from Durham University, and also Dean Hollerith, who is the dean of the Washington National Cathedral. And so I was saying that in principle, an advanced scientific civilization is a good approximation to what religious scripts called God, because it could produce, in principle, life and baby universes in its laboratories. So if that's the case, and we face we witness the technologies that they are capable of producing, we would be at awe. And it would be similar to religious awe, because it would be so far beyond us. But rather than bury our head in the sand and say nothing is out there, we are the smartest, we are powerful, we should approach reality with a sense of modesty. And because, so far everything we've learned is that indicates that we are not the main actors in this play. We were thinking that the play is about us, that we are at the center of the stage. It turns out we are not at the center of the stage. And actually the play started 13.8 billion years ago. We just came at the end. So how dare we even imagine that the play is about us, and then, the only way to figure out is to look for other actors that may have been around for a while, and maybe they have a better sense of what the play is about. a sense of modesty is in place. And why should we be arrogant? Why should we stigmatize the study of this subject? It's just not intelligent to do that.
I agree with that. And if it is a play, I would like to know the audience as well.
Well, the audience may be part of the play.
That's true. Do you think that Occam's razor is used as a crutch to so that people could sort of shake off this idea that Oumuamua might be of extraterrestrial origin?
I wouldn't call it Occam's razor. I would call it conservatism, in the sense of sticking to what you already know as if that's the full truth, which is basically what I was mentioning before about the adults in the room. So, adults in general, they enjoy the notion that they already learned a lot about reality and they don't need to learn more. And they have very strong opinions, okay?
Yeah.
And that's wrong, okay? And it's wrong because, first of all, what we know is an island in an ocean of ignorance. And secondly, many times we were proven wrong. So just be modest and say it's a learning experience throughout your life. You're never an adult. You're always a kid, okay? And just admit the fact that you don't know much and you want to learn from evidence rather than your prejudice, rather than pretend, have maintain an image as if you're knowledgeable. And, that's really important. And so coming back to Occam's razor, that is an excuse to ignore anomalous evidence. You basically say, oh, it must be the simplest explanation based on what I already know. Just to give you an example, there was a paper published in Nature Astronomy about 2 years ago by a group of astronomers that said that this object that my book is dedicated to, Oumuamua, must be natural. Okay, it's a rock, period. That's it. So by authority, a large team of experts that worked on rocks for decades declared this object to be natural. Okay, now a few months later, another group of people argued, actually, to explain the anomalies, you needed to be a chunk of frozen hydrogen. Okay, and then there was a problem with that because it would evaporate very quickly. And so another team said, well, maybe it's a cloud of dust particles. And then there was a problem with that because it could get destroyed by coming close to the sun, get heated. So another team suggested it's a chunk of frozen nitrogen chipped off the surface of a planet like Pluto. And, every time, the reason I bring this up is there was a problem with each of these proposals, but all of them invoked something we've never seen before. We don't know if there are chunks of frozen hydrogen, nitrogen, or dust particles floating. But the point is, you had to resort to these to explain the anomalies. And the fact that the first object we have seen is of this nature and not similar to the most common rocks we find in the solar system implies that it's not trivial to explain the anomalies. Otherwise, why would these groups come up with all these explanations? If it was something we've seen before, they would just say that, okay? So the reason I bring this up is because there was this group of experts, the authorities on this subject that wrote the initial paper saying it's natural. How could they say it's natural if the explanations for what natural means came months later and were all based on something that we've never seen before, okay? So you cannot say it's natural if there are anomalies that indicate that it must be something we've never seen before. Within the mainstream community, I'm not saying this is my view, other people within the mainstream had to come and explain the anomalies in ways that that require something we've never seen before. Yet the claim that it's a rock of a natural origin was published, and the statement case closed was made before those explanations came about, before. And that means that there was an agenda, the same as the agenda of those philosophers, okay? And of course, when you ask people, they say, oh, well, there was this paper by the experts that said that it's natural, therefore it's natural. And I say, well, what about these other people that try to explain it, that they have problems? And then other people say, oh, there are these other people that try to explain it in this way, therefore case closed. And I say, well, but these are things that we've never seen before. How can you say case closed? We don't know if it's that case because we don't have enough evidence. We've never seen anything like it. Let's just collect more. So the key is, it's a learning experience. Even if we find that it's a nitrogen iceberg, on the next Oumuamua, by getting close to it, taking a close-up photograph, and we see that, it's a nitrogen iceberg, that teaches us something really new, because there must be nurseries that make those nitrogen icebergs at much higher abundance than the rocks that we're familiar with. And that's something new, so it's worth investigating. The way to respond to anomalies is to say, well, that's exciting. Let's fund a new space mission that will go and take a close-up photograph of the next Oumuamua so that we can learn more about it. And let's allow the possibility that it's maybe artificial, stay on the table. What is so, repulsive about this notion that there might be some equipment out there? Like, why isn't that part of our vocabulary? Why is weakly interacting massive particles that were never found part of the mainstream vocabulary in the context of dark matter? Or supersymmetric particles that were never found. People got awards, honors. The string theory, which is the dominant, most popular theory among theoretical physicists for unifying quantum mechanics and gravity, was founded on the foundation that assumes that supersymmetry exists. And yet, supersymmetry was not found by the Large Hadron Collider. That doesn't bother anyone. They say, okay, well, maybe it's around the corner. The next accelerator might discover it. So that's the mainstream. Okay, that's the same mainstream that says, let's not discuss extraterrestrial equipment. They allow these discussions to hold, and discussions about the multiverse, extra dimensions, speculative ideas that are not at all testable within our lifetime. So I'm not saying testable next year, testable the next decade. There is no plan, no program by which the multiverse idea will be tested by experimental data. There is no plan for testing string theory in the laboratory, no plan. And I have no problem with that. You can work on mathematical ideas, but don't claim that they carry forward the torch of physics. That's what the mainstream is saying. And at the same time, don't ridicule, something that is much less speculative, such as we exist on a planet near a star like the sun. There are lots of stars like the sun that have planets like the Earth, roughly at the same separation. We sent out equipment to space. Therefore, it's quite possible that other technological civilization existed and sent equipment to space. And by the way, most stars predated us by billions of years. So this could have happened 1 billion years ago. And 1 billion years is a long enough time to populate the entire Milky Way galaxy with equipment that could replicate itself, that may have intelligence, may be autonomous. So to figure out if we live in such a reality, we can just look at the sky. So there is a test. And think about it, President Biden signed into law the defense bill just a couple of weeks ago, and it was $768 billion. And the definition of the defense bill is to protect the United States, to defend the United States from adversaries, from other nations, okay? So nearly $1 trillion dedicated to the concern for the security of the United States relative to other nations. Now, suppose you were to find, the Galileo Project that I established, which we can speak about, suppose it finds a technological piece of equipment that came from another civilization. So that would not be a matter of national security. It would be an international matter. And suppose the political system says, well, that is as important as protecting ourselves against other nations. That means investing $1 trillion a year to the study of that subject. And that is, thousands of times more than was invested in science before, because the biggest science projects consumed, like the Large Hadron Collider or the James Webb Space Telescope, they consumed $10 billion over a period of several decades in partnership of several nations. And what I'm saying is, at the moment, the search for such extraterrestrial equipment is not funded at all. So just think about, how important it is or could be to the future of humanity, and how little is invested in that direction. And it really is something that needs to change in our priorities.
Well, I wonder if there's some level of emotional intelligence that, like, do people really want to know? Do they want to find it?
So on that, I would say my daughters never wanted to go to the kindergarten. They were really happy staying at home and believing that they are the smartest in the world. And if I had to drag them to the kindergarten. But the whole point of science is learning about reality, right? So, we could have continued to think that we are at the center of the universe. Why is it important to know what the reality is? Because then you can launch a rocket that will reach Mars or the moon, or plan what to do in space. It's really important to know what the reality is, so that you can adapt your actions, to accomplish goals within that reality. If you believe in a false notion of reality, you might be happier. I call that virtual reality. The world of virtual reality is infinite. You can put goggles on your head and then be very happy, sort of like taking recreational drugs. You can be in a reality that satisfies all your needs, where you are very pleased by what you see. You can put goggles and you will be at the center of the universe, no problem whatsoever. The only problem with that is that reality that you're looking at is not shared by everyone else. Okay, so and it's not the real one, it's the virtual one. And I think it's really important for us to figure out the real one, because just think about Bernie Madoff. Okay, he had a beautiful virtual reality by which he asked people to give him money, and he will promise to give them back more than they gave him. And that was a beautiful virtual reality, because, the proof was that people were willing to give him money. What could be better testimony to the fact that it was beautiful? They said, wow, that's amazing, this virtual, take our money. And of course, when they asked for their money back, he couldn't deliver, he was put in jail. And that's the experimental test of the virtual reality that he was advocating for. So my point is, experimental tests are not a nuance, the way string theorists would argue. They are not something that you can accept or reject and say, okay, well, maybe in 1,000 years, someone will test my ideas. No, because that, Bernie Madoff would have been happy to argue that in 1,000 years they can test his idea. In the meantime, give me your money. That's obviously, the basis for a Ponzi scheme. So, if we want to avoid Ponzi schemes, if we want to learn about the actual reality that we live in, we have to follow the scientific method, which is going, in small steps, not assuming we know the answer in advance, and learning from evidence. You see, that's the key. And the most important question is, what is the neighborhood that we live in? Do we have neighbors? That's the most important question, because it will change, just like it changed the perspective of my daughters. It will change everything for us.
Yeah, and I do see a parallel between the multiverse story versus the Ponzi scheme, and it actually reminded me of years ago when, way before the pandemic, I used to volunteer with an animal rescue group where we would stand out on the sidewalk on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and we would have animals and we would have donation jars. And I remember there were several times when, a very well-to-do lady might come by. You could tell that she had means, that she lived in the area. And she'd look at our donation jar and she'd be like, I don't need to donate because God takes care of all his creatures. And I'm like, well, he didn't take care of these guys. We're actually going broke from paying their vet bills. So that's wrong. But I think that they come up with these fantasies to get out of responsibility. And that's kind of a parallel that I'm seeing.
Exactly. Like, for example, in the context of the multiverse, a student that gets a C in an exam, if that student believes in the multiverse, that student would argue, well, there is another copy of me somewhere in the multiverse that gets an A. What's the problem? I shouldn't take any responsibility, But, I find that a very lazy approach to the reality that we all share. And another example is, 1,000 years ago, people believed that the human body has a soul, which again was a virtual reality. And they argued that anatomy should be forbidden. Now, you might say, okay, well, what's the problem with people thinking that the human body has a soul and therefore you shouldn't dissect it because you would hurt the soul if you dissect the human body? Okay, what's the problem with that? It's nice to believe that humans have souls, and in fact, it improves your love life if you believe that the person you're in love with has a soul, something that is not captured by the physics of the body of the person that you speak with. And you might not want that person to go through an operation, medical operation, because you say it would hurt the soul of the person I'm in love with. Okay, you might argue that. Now, what's the problem with this virtual reality? The problem is if modern medicine or science would have believed that notion, or would have said, there are people arguing that, I don't really believe in it, but it's controversial, I don't want to deal with the human body, let's forget about it. Then there would never be an mRNA vaccine to COVID-19. We would never understand the DNA, what makes the human body, and we would be much worse off fighting disease or repairing the human body, from anything. And instead, once anatomy was practiced, we learned so much about the human body. Now, there are still people saying, okay, maybe there is something beyond the physical composition of the human body. I don't want to argue with that. But the point is, anatomy should not be forbidden. Okay, that's my point. And studying the reality that we live in, meaning getting into the human body and figuring out what it's made of, ended up allowing all the important discoveries of modern medicine and improve the health and the longevity of a lot of people, okay? And clearly understanding reality has great benefits for us as humans, because then we can adapt to that reality properly. We can do the right things that will promote our goals. If we understand that global warming is triggered by this and that, we can change our behavior, that. So the point is that it's always worth looking at the mirror or understanding what is really happening rather than hallucinating and imagining things that flatter our ego. But unfortunately, not a lot of people are brave. And I'm saying that not about the general public. I'm saying that about the academic community, which is very surprising to me because the government, signed into law, Congress legislated the establishment of a new office that would study unidentified aerial phenomena just a few weeks ago, and it will start its operation, this new office, in June 2022. And of course, that office will consume funds, a lot of money, taxpayers' money. Now you ask yourself, how is it possible that former CIA directors Brennan and Woolsey, former President Barack Obama, Bill Nelson, head of NASA, when he was a senator, he looked at the classified data that established the foundation for this legislation. All these people talk about it as a serious matter, while academia stigmatizes it and refuses to engage with it. I heard an astronomer say, I have better things to do. I don't have time to deal with this. And I ask myself, the government is concerned enough to establish a new office. And, science is supposed to serve society. And the government is the most conservative organization. So what do you have time to? To work out the Hubble constant to the second decimal point? Is that really helping society more than finding out the nature of these objects? Now, suppose these objects end up being a natural phenomenon, like an atmospheric phenomenon. So be it. Let's just figure it out. Why isn't it the responsibility of people in academia to figure out the nature of things that the government finds puzzling, that the public is extremely interested in? Because after all, science is funded by the public. And nevertheless, what you find in academia is an approach that distances itself from the public, because they say, oh no, all this nonsense is being said. And once again, I come back to this example of the human body having a soul. It's, if we were to distance ourselves from that notion just because we find it, inappropriate, or then we would not develop modern medicine. So I think scientists should be brave, especially when the government says we don't understand something. Scientists should say, okay, let's engage in it. That's why I established the Galileo Project out of private donations. The money that I have, $2 million at the moment, is not taken away from any project to study the dark matter of the universe. Okay, and it's a factor of it's hundreds of times less than the funds allocated for the search for dark matter. And I ask you, if we find that the dark matter is weakly interacting massive particles, what effect will it have on our daily life? And there are more than 100 scientists involved in the Galileo Project. So it's a scientific project involving more than 100 scientists that are building telescope systems. So the first telescope system will be constructed on the roof of the Harvard College Observatory in the coming months. To get, that will include taking a video of the sky in the infrared, in the optical band, the visible band, in the radio and audio, and recording all that data and analyzing it with artificial intelligence algorithms. And once the first telescope system will work, we will make copies of it depending on the level of funding we have. We need about $100 million to make enough telescope systems such that we will get enough data and we'll be able to make a very clear statement about these unidentified aerial phenomena. So we basically are following it using the scientific method. It's not a rich individual that studies a phenomena that is on the fringe by a group of people that do not have a PhD, or a group of politicians, or this is not it. We are within the academic system. There are more than 100 scientists very excited about the prospects of the Galileo Project, doing scientific work, designing a telescope system that will be duplicated, that will collect scientific data, which will be analyzed in an open and transparent way, that will be published in peer-reviewed journals. We are already working on the first set of papers that describe the project, okay? So this is within academia. It's not part of the mainstream because we are the first one to do it. So just like the poem of Robert Frost, we are taking a path that was not taken. Now, Robert Frost said that made all the difference for him. For me, what it makes the difference for is that there may be low-hanging fruit that we will pick up that was never picked up because nobody took that path, okay? So it's not a matter of waiting for the future for this to happen. It's already happening. It's called the Galileo Project. And if we get enough funding at the level of $100 million, we'll give you definite conclusions about what these unidentified aerial phenomena might mean, or at least constrain them. We might explain them in terms of natural phenomena, human-made phenomena, or something else. It's a fishing expedition. We don't assume anything. We are following the scientific method, trying to collect the evidence. So, here you have it. You just have to wait a year or a few years, and you will be able to review some scientific papers written on this subject, published in peer-reviewed journals, and it's happening. Now, the government is fully aware of that, and a testimony to that effect is the Gillibrand Amendment that was the foundation for the establishment of this new office in government that will start its operation in June 2022. When the Gillibrand Amendment was first formulated, it mentioned the Galileo Project. Now, I didn't do any lobbying in Washington, but it mentioned it. So apparently people there are aware of the project. So what you were describing is not something that we have to wait for and hope for. It's already happened. It happened already, okay? So just stay tuned. And, in order for this to happen in full scope, we just need full funding. That's all. And the level of funding that we need is at the level of a modest scientific project. $100 million is not a lot. The biggest scientific projects are $10 billion. And we will already be able to make very interesting statements about the nature of unidentified aerial phenomena with $100 million. We have a second component of the Galileo project, which aims to take a high-resolution image of an object like Oumuamua, this first interstellar object that was discovered in 2017 that didn't look like a comet or an asteroid from the solar system. And for that, we are designing the space mission because, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book, Extraterrestrial. I wouldn't need to write the book if we had an image of Oumuamua. So that's the second component of the Galileo project. And hopefully in the coming year or two, we will be able to make significant progress in our knowledge.
Could you talk a little bit about, I know that you've brought this up in past discussions, but since this is, my audience are largely creative writers, especially speculative fiction writers, you talk to a certain extent about science fiction with great disdain, and I love it. And
well, I can tell you that in the forum on November 10th at the Washington National Cathedral, Jeff Bezos was saying that he was inspired to use his wealth to advance space tourism by watching Star Trek as a kid. And I was sitting next to Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence. I was telling her, I never found Star Trek inspiring or attractive because the storyline violates the laws of physics. And, it bothers me. I cannot enjoy a storyline that violates the laws of physics. It doesn't look real to me. It actually bothers me because not only that it doesn't look real, it's misleading the reader. So I think, why bother to even continue reading it or watching it? Avril Haines said, well, we have to work on you, Avi. Now, I actually reported on this in a commentary that was published in The Hill a couple of weeks ago. And then the same day, I heard from William Shatner, who played Captain Kirk on Star Trek. He wanted to interview me. And I had this interview a few days ago. And I told William Shatner, I said, look, you are the best person to tell the difference between virtual reality and the actual reality that we live in, because you played the role of Captain Kirk on USS Enterprise, which is virtual reality, okay? And then about half a year ago, you flew into space. So you actually witnessed the reality of flying to space. And it's probably quite different, right? And I asked him, and he completely agreed with me. He said it's a completely different experience. So here you have it.
Yeah, I think what Avril might have been alluding to, I mean, I wasn't there, but I find that a lot of the people who say that they were inspired by it, it was really just a tool to get them interested enough to pursue it. So I've heard that with a lot of NASA people too. Oh, I joined NASA because I loved Star Trek as a kid. And maybe that's what it's good for, digging those people out of society so they'll go into these fields. I'm an advocate for science fiction authors to, rather than creating a pseudoscience to serve the story, have the story served by a more accurate understanding of science. But I don't know
how
you can.
Okay, so the reason we are in that situation where the narrative violates the laws of physics is because the scientists are boring. Okay, so the way science is done is really not inspiring because, again, a lot of scientists are trying to portray an image that they are experts or trying to advocate notions that are not testable or, all kind. Okay, so my point is science could be exciting. Doesn't need to be boring. You don't need to invent new laws of physics in order to make your storyline exciting. And I'm trying to demonstrate that with the Galileo Project. So here is a project to find equipment. So as a science fiction writer, you don't need to go very far. You just subscribe to the laws of physics. You know about the Galileo Project. Just imagine that the Galileo Project finds a piece of hardware in space. It could be close to the Earth. I mean, already Arthur C. Clarke imagined that in Rendezvous with Rama, but it was one possible storyline. But you can imagine many other storylines resulting, depending on what this object is, right? If it's a tiny object that has artificial intelligence that tries to, it could be like a Trojan horse, like we say, oh, it looks really cute. We accept it to our society, and then it does all kinds. I mean, there are lots of storylines that you can imagine, but I'm saying they are rooted in science. What the Galileo Project is doing is using the scientific method to search near Earth for objects that might have been manufactured by an extraterrestrial technological civilization. And all you need to incorporate into that storyline is your imagination as to how our civilization, technological civilization, will be in a century from now, maybe a millennium from now, maybe a million years from now. Okay, so just imagine us better, bigger and better, and then say, okay, maybe someone else is already in that phase, and just imagine that someone else sending equipment for 1 billion years into space, and just imagine this equipment reaching us on Earth. We are at a much primitive, more primitive state, but how do we interact with that? Okay, and I'm saying this is science fiction in a way, right? Because we haven't yet found that, but it could become science real when the Galileo Project finds these things. So it's worthwhile exploring, because then we will start contemplating with various scenarios. Currently there is no protocol to dealing with how to engage with a piece of. Now, if you think about the past, people said, oh, we are searching for radio signals from other stars, okay? And of course, the nearest star is 4 light years away. So for a round trip conversation, it would take a decade, okay? And a decade is a long time. You can take your time, no rush as to how to respond to it. But imagine a piece of equipment just next to you. You don't have time. You have to decide immediately what to do about it, how to engage with it. The protocol is completely different. And currently there is no international agreement regarding how to respond. And even if there was, some crazy guy somewhere would violate that protocol. And that is a basis for another science fiction story. If everyone agrees to behave, and then someone else is not behaving, what would happen? I'm saying just combining humans with equipment from another civilization more advanced that represent our future is the baseline for so many narratives that you can think about of science fiction, but they would be rooted in science. They don't require Captain Kirk riding on a USS Enterprise as if a human can survive in, humans can, by the way, that's the other thing that Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, they're talking about putting a lot of humans in space. Actually, Bezos was talking about, at first millions of humans out there, and then ultimately maybe 1 trillion that would regard Earth as a national park that they go to visit every now and then. And I just thought that makes no sense, because if you put a human for more than a few years in space, that human would not survive, because we are protected by the magnetic field and the atmosphere of Earth. We wouldn't survive by the bombardment of cosmic rays, energetic particles in space. So clearly they haven't worked out the health hazards. And how can they contemplate sending so many humans to their death, right? That makes no. So my point is, so even business people talk about things that are not following, scientific reasoning, and the scope of science, constrained by the laws of physics, is so rich that it's not boring at all. Why not stick why not stick to science and just imagine narratives that could be real and, might be real, depending on what the Galileo Project finds.
I'm really optimistic about all this. I love the idea of investing hard into the study of objects and tangible items. Because, little UFOs, if they can acknowledge that they exist, then we can study them.
Oh, then you would have material for films that do not require any fiction.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yes, that's my goal here, is to inspire the writers.
If you were to ask me what my goal is to make science real that will inspire fiction, rather than allow science fiction to inspire science.
Yeah, that's my secret goal as well, and I hope we achieve it in our lifetime.
Oh yeah, I'm confident. I'm confident because, again, I don't think that we are that special. You see, I think it's arrogant of most people to believe that we are so unique and special that it will be really tough to find evidence for others. I think the reason we didn't find evidence because we didn't search.
Yeah.
And the Galileo Project is really the first scientific project doing the search in earnest, and that's why I'm optimistic, because I just don't believe that we are special. Out of modesty, you see. There is, especially since you are 40, I'm quite confident there will be news for you during your lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, the disclosure of the tic-tac UFO was very inspiring.
But the data that was released is not of high quality, so there must be a lot of data that is classified that we don't have access to. And what the Galileo Project will try to do is make our data open so anyone can look at it. And this way we can shed some light on the nature of these objects.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to keep up with you guys. And I hope that you reach out to me if you ever want a place to talk and vent.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. It was really a pleasure. And I'll send you an email with all the links. Very nice speaking with you. And good luck with your creative work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.